I played an unhealthy amount of this game since it came out. Why? Because I am a fan, and this video might as well serve as a cautionary tale of the dangers being a fan entails. You see, Piranha Bytes is a small to medium-sized German developer that created my favorite action role-playing games of all time, Gothic 1 and 2. These games combined many different influences, from Ultima to Tomb Raider, in a cohesive whole that at times feels as if it was the looking glass immersive open world RPG we never got. The world was seamless for the most part, with virtually no loading screens. People had complex day and night schedules. Drawing your weapon in front of someone or entering their home made them threaten until you stopped or they lost patience and attacked. These elements, and many more, made the Gothic games so memorable. The combat system was also worthy of praise. It starts as this impenetrable mess with esoteric controls and slowly morphs into an elegant affair, where both the player's defense and offense are timing based, which takes a real balancing act to get right. Now, obviously, I am lionizing the games a bit, nothing is perfect. The interface wasn't exactly stellar and the endgame tended to degenerate into mediocre dungeon crawling. I still love them even with those blemishes. Sadly, I hold no such feelings for what followed. Gothic 3 is where Piranha Bytes went beyond their means, by bloating the world to a full continent in the style of the Elder Scrolls. The result was an absolute disaster of unfinished and severely underpolished content combined with several dubious design decisions and a hollow shell of a story. Years later, there is a nearly 2 GB community patch that stabilizes the game fully and tries its damn hardest to squeeze life out of a fundamentally broken product. Afterwards came a change in publishers, as well as a new franchise, Risen. Thankfully, they went back to the compact landmass of the first two Gothics and even squeezed in some improvements here and there. The tedious dungeon crawling did hit much earlier though this time around, and overall it just lacked that je ne sais quoi. So I liked Risen 1, it just doesn't hold the same place in my heart. There is also Risen 2 and Risen 3 to consider, which I don't, because they feel like someone took the Piranha Bytes formula, gutted it, and then stuffed it full with nonsensical mainstream design, resulting in these completely bland and uninspired husks of a game. This is made all the sadder by the fact that it was the original team that did this. You can very rarely see glimpses of quality, but those are few and far between. So now we arrive at the present, with Elex, where Piranha Bytes changed publishers again and made a new IP with the occasion. Again. Watching the development of this title was interesting because this is Piranha Bytes' biggest project to date, featuring a massive world with different areas that have completely different landscapes and didn't they try this with Gothic 3? And wasn't that a game they messed up with 20 people? And aren't there still around 20 people? Oh no, this is not good at all. Elex feels more like a Frankenstein's monster recreation rather than a carefully conceived project. It takes elements from every iteration under Piranha Bytes formula and stitches it into an experience that is filled with breathtaking moments of player freedom and clever quest design opposite an atrocious struggle with broken, unpolished, and downright unfinished features. I've never been a fan of game excuses involving the phrase, "it gets better," but I have to say that Elex fits this description perfectly. The start is harsh. You will find yourself confronted by overly bloated dialogue seemingly translated by aliens, systems that not only refuse to teach the player but flat out lie, and an action combat system which feels like it was designed by people who never played an action game in their life. But slowly, almost agonizingly so, the game plays its hand and we have a clear view of an experience that revolves around losing yourself in a world with interesting quests and sights to see. With the good comes the bad, and which one will outweigh the other shall depend more on your familiarity with this developer rather than general gaming habits. The world of Magalan was a fine and dandy place until a comet hit, resulting in things being not so fine and dandy. It all went your usual post-apocalyptic route with the added twist that the comet was made of the eponymous Elex, a mineral that does pretty much whatever the writers wanted to. This made people group up and fight for the substance. You have the clerics that use it for tech, the berserkers that use it to cast magic, the outlaws that use it to make ultra cocaine, and the albs which consume it directly to turn into superpowered douchebags with no emotion. The player assumes the role of Jax, super commander of the douchebags on a secret mission that goes awry. Betrayal occurs and Jax is left for dead, only to wake up with no equipment and more importantly no Elex, which results in him experiencing emotion for the first time. From there he goes on to explore the world, join one of the factions he fought all of his life, go home for revenge, and decide the fate of the world. A world that is surprisingly beautiful from a distance and not so pretty close up. The texture work can get really shoddy at times. During the intro cinematic you get to see a close-up of the protagonist's helmet and oh god, take it away. I genuinely thought that I had set the texture quality to the lowest setting by accident. This isn't helped by the painfully low number of faces. Combined with the reused voice actors, the world feels like an unfortunate experiment in cloning at times. However, these issues are compensated by the art direction, which can be stunning at times, whether you are running around a high-tech city built into a mountainside, or some rustic huts by a waterfall. There is a sense of place here created by the level designer and artists that can at times beat even AAA efforts. The player will have quite the time appreciating the efforts of the art team, since this is a heavily exploration-oriented game that involves running past monsters that you have no right fighting at the beginning, all the while looking in every nook and cranny that seems stashed with goodies which feed into a progression system requiring vast amounts of currency and thus stays relevant throughout the game. This is made all the better by a feature that I thought would doom the game when it actually ended up saving it. Namely, the jetpack. The world is your oyster with it, and my god is it fun. There's just something intrinsically cathartic about zipping around a land that wasn't necessarily designed with this feature in mind. There are rewards for getting on rooftops and other high verticality locations, but generally speaking, Elex feels like a normal open world where you enable the cheats to fly around. I am still unsure if the decision to make jetpacking feel like a liberating exploit is a conscious decision or just a mistake. Regardless, I am glad it happened.
This is the pit. Any Elex, any forbidden technology that comes into Goliath, this is where it's kept. Move along there, move along.
That was fun, as is exploration in general. You can see how they tried to get back to basics by the mixing of low and high level enemies to create a more natural feeling world. Whether they did it well enough is another matter. The enemy placement is not cautionary like in the Gothics, where it was meant to ward the players from certain areas. The idea was that you should avoid fights you can't take. You are told not to go in places like the forest unprepared.
Do not enter the old ruins. There are too many around here, and most of them are old fortifications dating back to the time of the First Orc War. Some are abandoned orc dwellings. There are often orcs in those ruins, or even worse creatures. I'd avoid those places, especially at night. And one more hint, don't go into the forest.
But the actual places you are supposed to go to, where the quests are and where the roads lead to, are filled with starting enemies that you're supposed to be able to fight. Elex is much more haphazard in terms of distributing high-level enemies. This ruins the endgame excitement. You can go a short trip from the first city and find some of the most powerful enemies in the game right off the bat. And this gets further compounded by the spawn system used. The game has hand-placed monsters that get replaced with newer and tougher versions after advancing the chapters of the main plot. All good, and it is basically what the old games did. What the old games didn't do is scaled respawns, which have some seriously high variance. Here's me finding a jackal, a creature way above my pay grade at that moment. I died, and when I went there again, there was a mass rat runt, which is possibly the easiest enemy in the entire game. These respawning enemies, along with the haphazardly placed high-level monsters, result in the world feeling quite artificial, and in transparent service to a design rather than a living, breathing world. I wouldn't say it ruined the exploration, but it did seriously damage the experience. It's not like these types of spawns are needed. All Piranha Bytes games feature extensive use of teleportation mechanics, usually after you are done with a respective area. Speaking of teleporters, there is also this absolutely idiotic tendency to put enemy spawn points right next to them, resulting in situations that are about as far as possible from Gothic's philosophy of punishing the player for biting off more than they can chew. In Gothic 2, townsfolk will gossip fearfully about the possible presence of orcish scouts near the city. And they are right to be afraid, since it's true. And these orc warriors are way above your early power level. One is in the woods and he's meant to be taken down by an NPC during a quest, and the other is guarding a teleporter that plays a role in a different quest later on. One of the weapons of these orcish warriors is used to earn the approval of a powerful person in another quest. You see, this is what I mean. These high-level monsters were placed with care in regards to the world building and the player experience. This is the type of thing that made the Gothic games what they are. Now I know what some people will say, but Ludo, what about the jetpack? You can evade everyone with it, right? Go anywhere at any time. The answer to that is yes and no. In the older games, if you enter the beast's aggro range, they would growl and after like 3 or 4 growls, attack. In Elex, they will chase you for a long time even after they finish their growls. I once ran away from this combat mech due to stealing an item from under it, and we literally went from one biome to another until the chase was over. Quests are also affected negatively by the monster placement and behavior. The item I stole from this particular mech was a very early quest, and Elex has an annoying tendency to throw stuff your way that you have no business handling. It is especially grating when you are told to hurry up.
I need the AI chips from those combat units back as soon as you can get them. Hurry it up before the whole horde is fighting itself.
If this is so important, why are you waiting on me to do it? There are only a couple of quests like that, but they do feel out of place. Gothic 1 had a perfect example of how to do this. In one of the quests in the sect camp, you are tasked with finding and helping foragers in the swamp. Unfortunately, the place is infested with swamp sharks, basically endgame enemies. Thus, you have to dodge their relatively long patrol paths to finish your tasks. This is how you do interaction between a low-level player and high-level monsters with actual game design. Not just, here, go kill these things that you can't until 20 hours later. But I don't want to be too harsh, because the stuff quests do get right is quite well done. There is one instance where you are given a mission by a berserker to exterminate a series of Albs, members of your former faction. But once there, you find out that these Albs are peaceful. They want to offer an alliance with the berserker guy that sent you to hunt them down. Being a good Boy Scout, I told the quest giver of this possibility and gave their location, only to find that this was a stupid idea, since if I had been paying attention, then I would have noticed the hate-filled rant the quest giver expressed at the start of the quest chain. I decided to kill the guy for using me like that, but this only managed to anger both faction leaders in the process. Way to go, Ludo.
If you think I see Nezol's death and your meeting with him as a coincidence, then you are mistaken.
How am I doing?
Do you ask me that expecting to receive my pledge? You are responsible for the death of a citizen of Goliath.
This is where Elex excels, making the player pay attention to the environment and not just mindlessly going from point A to point B. This type of quest design demands the same type of attention that you would be required to use when exploring a dangerous world like this one. The two elements just fit each other like a glove. It is no surprise that the side content is by far the show stealer here, with NPCs actively lying or trying to rope you in on their side of a conflict, and remembering to hate you if you don't take the bait. It is the type of meaningful quest design that puts faith in the player's instincts and their ability to navigate problems with solutions that aren't immediately apparent. I also greatly enjoyed that they do not enforce the hand-holding upon the player. You can activate quest markers if you want, but most of the quests actually have directions given to you at the start.
Relay station that's gone down. It's over to the northeast of the city. Head that way and keep looking out for an antenna on the horizon. But I have no idea what the issue is there. You might be able to...
There are some instances where this doesn't happen though. Usually if you hear the words coordinates, it means you should use the quest marker. Instances of absolutely no direction did happen, but they are rare. I'd say somewhere around 5% of quests suffer from this issue, which, while not negligible, is quite manageable. This sporadic lack of attention also translates into the first town, unfortunately. The others are fine, but Goliath, the Berserker city, is way too big for how sparsely populated it is. The outer ring of the old camp in Gothic 1 had 32 NPCs with unique voice lines, while the entirety of Goliath has 22 NPCs with unique voice lines, but it is at least 4 times bigger. It feels like you're wasting your time at first finding these people, and it doesn't leave a good first impression. Elex also falls into the same trap as Piranha Bytes' own Gothic 3. With the exception of one particular location that is based on choice and consequence, the world is simply too big to allow for complex quest chains. Around 90% of the side content is already accessible on the world map from the beginning, meaning that NPCs rarely get used past one quest, and sooner or later you'll realize how static the world feels. For example, in the Berserker camp, you can help or impede a cultivator in his experiments using a magical plant serum, but no matter the outcome, there is no follow-up. As I said though, the side content is probably the reason people stay with the game. While obviously not flawless, it is still great. The same cannot be said about the main quest, which, like the vast majority of open world games ever, is not up to snuff. To start with the positives, it doesn't have that fake sense of urgency that is prevalent in games such as Skyrim, Fallout 4 or Witcher 3. Games that don't justify the protagonist running around the hills for days on end while the world needs saving. However, the way in which Elex avoids this issue is nothing sort of dull. The game is split into 4 chapters that follow the same tedious structure. Go to an exposition heavy character, have a chat, and then receive a laundry list of objectives to complete on the overworld. Well, I say overworld, but it really should be world. There is just one location that barely sorta kinda qualifies as a dungeon. Thing is, these objectives are for the most part already present on the world map, same as the side quests. Meaning that when you do get on with the main plot, chances are it will feel more like turning in your homework than any sort of epic quest. It feels like the developers had some idea of when the player should get on with the main quest, but no idea on how to properly guide them. In one of the few instances of getting something right, Gothic 3 had a main quest based on visiting places and acquiring reputation with different factions. While the story had massive problems, structurally speaking, this type of main quest made sense for a huge world. Elex, on the other hand, is even bigger than Gothic 3 but uses the structure of the original Gothic 1 and 2. The result is that the chapter formula is spread so thin that it feels directionless and ultimately stale. A staleness also mirrored in the writing. It's pretty generic stuff, but what is worse is how serious the writers took themselves. Outside of some winks at the camera and the occasional gag with the crazy Mad Max style outlaws, Piranha Bytes really wanted you to take all of this stuff seriously. It lacks that modern self-awareness that made the older games stride into a Yankee in King Arthur's court territory with its weird accents and blasé characters. They felt like simple but believable worlds, not trips down to the Renaissance fair like every other fantasy RPG. Elex, on the other hand, pretty much feels like the dime a dozen pulp that keeps getting churned out nowadays, with very few moments that stand out. NPCs also have a serious tendency to ramble on. Did the writers get paid by the word? It's not that they're throwing their life stories at you, but they just beat around the bush with what they want to say. The dialogue could have been cut in half and rewritten without much being lost.
They stole my armor and my equipment.
Walking around without a decent weapon. I can help you find a safe place and new equipment. You can find work to earn enough to buy equipment. No armor, no weapons, no companions.
You'll train me and give me equipment.
And you can earn the Alexa to buy armor and supplies. You're short of equipment. You can find supplies and get yourself back on your feet in Goliath. You should try to get a better weapon and some armor before equipment.
Honestly, there are only 2 characters who are more or less the same character, nonchalant hucksters that have any sort of memorable moments to them. But here's the thing, while the dialogue is bloated, the actual world building is a lot more skimpy. It suffers from a lack of attention to detail. Why is there a skeleton that everyone ignores outside one of the populated buildings? Why is the town attacked by 5 rotboars that live in a 20-foot cave inside the city? Why do elves have ships but do not carpet bomb their enemies, and so on and so forth. They also decided to take some goddamn hints from Bethesda's Fallouts of all things. There is a silly amount of notes and audio logs spread across the world given how the apocalypse is centuries old apparently. It is meaningless or nonsensical fluff. It was stupid in the new Fallouts and it is stupid here. Such a lazy way to deliver your narrative or world building. There is also the even sillier issue of zipping around with your jetpack and using your implanted device, which can cause the villagers of Goliath to shout at you for using technology. Do they do anything about it?
That technology will get you into trouble here.
Nope, but it is just one more element in this game that manages to annoy you. And it's not like there's anything special about these elements. The writers more or less came up with a setting in mind, then connected the dots. The clerics are by far the most consistent faction. They have Elex tech and Psi abilities. I mean, they might control people to bolster their ranks, and they are filled with religious zeal, but they are by far the most functional community. They are also written to be nicer than I expected. In one quest, you investigate a bunch of salvagers brainwashed into helping the clerics, and you confront them. They turn out to be surprisingly amicable.
I'm not part of any faction.
Then you can stay here as my guest. All clerics offer a hand to all free people. I hope one day you will come to serve Kalan. Remember my hospitality when you come to make your choice.
The Berserkers are the medieval faction of massive jerks that exile their own people at the drop of a hat and make absolutely no sense. They reject technology and use magic. When asked about their beliefs, they say, "Oh no, we don't reject all technology, just Elex technology since it caused the end of the world." That's a bit more understandable, but in that case, shouldn't they use guns and stuff? You know, pre-catastrophe technology? And if they are this regressive, where do they draw the line? Why not live like cavemen? Swords require blacksmiths, which I'm pretty sure is technology. While it is clear that some berserkers are more flexible than others, there's no real debate of any kind during the game, making it all feel sort of incoherent. And believe me when I say that the tech thing is small peanuts in comparison to the magic. In the old fantasy games, magic was a gift from the gods, and it was pretty straightforward. Here it makes no sense. Berserkers can use magic by turning Elex into mana. How does it all work?
How does mana help you cast magic?
That we have yet to understand.
Great explanation. On top of that, Albs also use magic, but when you find one such spell to use, you can see that it is a copy of a cleric ability. But aren't those psi abilities? So how does it all work? Is everything magic or is everything psi? I mean, the cleric abilities are just as spectacular as berserker magic, if not more so. To make things even more confusing, there is an instance of complete fairy tale logic where a person is turned into a monster, and it takes a magic word to turn them back. I am starting to think I am putting far more thought into the world of Elex than the writers, so I'm gonna stop now. Moving on, we have the Outlaws, which only exist because the writers say so. They don't have the tech edge, space magic, and they are complete bastards to each other. There is no reason why their special ability, super drugs, isn't copied by the clerics or Albs. After all, their advanced technology should allow them to synthesize drugs made by some idiots in the desert. The whole premise of the Outlaws reveals how the main writers came up with the idea of "we need a sword, a gun, and a laser faction," and then just filled in the blanks. Now, I will admit I might be completely wrong about some things here, because I played the game in English, and sometimes the game just doesn't very English good.
That is, if the animals didn't get me first. Or I don't eat the wrong thing and get poisoned. Don't eat the wrong thing and get poisoned.
But even with that excuse, there are some terrible mistakes here. Two of the faction towns are called the Fort and the Hort. Were they trying to confuse people on purpose? The nature-loving faction is called the Berserkers. What exactly does this have to do with the semi-mythic Nordic warriors that fought bare-chested? Shouldn't they be called Preservers or something? Also, the world is called Magalan, which just doesn't roll off the tongue in any way. I just can't see people referring to their world by that name on a daily basis. But like I said, the game has other highlights than the writing, and boy does the main quest show this. Spoilers, skip to the indicated time if you do not wish to hear about a banal bare-bones story. I'm not kidding about it being bare bones. The plot is this: Jax gets betrayed, Jax joins a faction, Jax does things to mess with the Albs, Jax attacks his former home, Jax learns the truth about Elex from the leader of the Albs. That's seriously it. Most of the main quests are like this. You need to shut down these Alb converters to stop the Albs. You need to find a commander to lead the fight against the Albs. You need to defend your base from a super Alb that is hunting for you. You need to hunt down these Alb commanders so the Alb home can be attacked, etc, etc, etc. There are just so many MMO style kill quests with no context to make them interesting. There are also clear story cuts. You ally with a guy called Zardom and he says, "I have this mutant army, muhahaha," then he disappears. You can confront and kill him in the epilogue and say the mutant army is defeated. So what was the point of this subplot exactly? There is only one actual story thread, and it's about Jax and his family. The execution is carried out by his brother Kallax at the start of the game, and Jax is desperate to find out why his own brother tried to murder him. From there, their father comes into the picture, and we learn that the two were actually kidnapped berserker children rather than true-blooded Albs. While this might sound interesting, all of it is marred by the horrible direction of the voice actors. I hate it so much. It sounds like a soap opera featuring every single modern military shooter protagonist ever. Every Alb sounds like he has constipation but doesn't want to talk about it. Want to know what a true non-emotional being sounds like?
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
That eerie calmness can genuinely be disturbing. Jax's journey also makes no sense. They could have done quests like Jax listens to music for the first time, or Jax sees a painting. He'd have to learn to express himself with a slew of new emotions. But that doesn't happen. Instead, it is the same gruff video game protagonist you see all over the place. I'm serious, you can replace this character with one of the Gears of War guys and nothing would change. So that's basically all there is to say here. The story is subpar and my genre savviness prevented me from enjoying the ending. You can actually turn a lot of the factions hostile in the epilogue based on your choices, but given that Elex 2 is coming out and the game doesn't keep your save file, I am 100% sure these branching paths will not matter in the future. So I took the ending at face value when I met with the hybrid, the leader of the Elves. He reveals that Elex was sent by aliens that will invade and it is a sort of terraforming material. Then you either kill him, make peace with him, or join him based on a binary morality meter. Yay! Look, I don't know what else to tell you. The writing is just not good in a very simple sort of way. There is only so much I can say about basic mistakes. Finally, it is time to discuss one of the biggest sticking points of this game, the combat and all the gripes I had with it. At first, all the good Piranha Bytes games seem like these impenetrable messes of weirdly controlled action driven by stats until you get a feel for the animations, much like any decent game in the action genre. While I was patient with it initially, my first impressions were getting worse by the hour, so at one point I stopped questing and I started testing. I say with no bit of hyperbole that in its current state this is one of the worst action combat systems I've ever played in the context of a full-price product by a team of professionals. Here's how it works. Your character has a light and heavy attack, the animations of which are based on one of 7 weapon sets. The light and heavy attack go in strike chains of 4 each, and when the player switches the type of attack, during a chain, it keeps the current chain going, so doing light, heavy results in the heavy attacks doing the 3rd and 4th swing of their respective chains. Defense-wise, your character can roll, block, parry, step backwards, or just plain run around. After this concise explanation, you might be deceived into thinking the game explains things clearly, but that's just not the case. For example, the tutorial makes no mention about having to attack while holding the block button to parry, and that's not the worst of it, especially compared with the straight up lies. The longer the combo, the more damage you deal. That's not true. Timing your swing affects the special attack bar and nothing else. Enhance your weapon with a reflector upgrade. What does it do? Hell knows, but it is both decorative and damaging. Yeah, thanks, that's really helpful. Also, you do not have a character sheet. I'm serious, this is an RPG in 2017 that does not have a character sheet. How much health do I have? How much damage do I do? What is parrying strength? How much parrying strength do I have? Apparently Piranha Bytes didn't consider adding one of the basic elements of any role-playing game ever. So simply put, you can never trust the devs due to their own words and inconsistencies. Lots and lots of inconsistencies. Elex also commits 2 sins which I despise regarding animation in action games. The starting swing of a chain is randomized, with a 2-handed sword being exempt, inconsistencies yay, and each strike has variable momentum, meaning that the player model is moved towards the enemy when they attack. Judging the distance properly turns into be as close as possible to the enemy so the game doesn't mess you up. Knowing the animation and range of your attacks is a fundamental concept found in good action games. Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, Dark Souls, Dragon's Dogma, the original Gothics. Sadly, modern action games are infected by a trend started by the Batman Arkham games. This shallow style where the designers took away the fundamentals so they can make everything flashier, while the player barely presses any inputs. Piranha Bytes took some lessons from there, unfortunately, and I am sad to see they haven't shaked off the influence yet. Plus, the quality of the animations aren't at a AAA level to make them feel satisfying. Most attack chains don't actually flow from one strike to the other. The best one is the one-handed sword light chain attack. The others have their transition animations be painfully obvious. This lack of polish also reflects harshly on the enemy animation. Everything is jerky and lacks finesse. It doesn't have that lifelike elasticity. I mean, just look at the scavengers from Gothic and the scavengers in Elex. Nowhere near as good and readable. Speaking of enemies, the variety is painfully low for a game that is stretched to such lengths. There are only 10 non-human enemies in this game. They might come in many different reskins, but from an animation perspective, this is all there is. The humanoids fare a bit better with a weapon style plus faction deciding how the AI behaves, but if you compared it even to Gothic 1, it is sorely lacking, especially since Elex is like 4 times bigger. I have fought this medium quadruped enemy and its varieties so many times that I don't ever want to see this animation set ever again. And it's not like they're satisfying to fight even the first time around. There is a severe lack of basic feedback here. It is hard to tell when you hit something, barely any blood, and the recoil animation is as jerky as an attack. Not to mention the sound. Everything sounds like you're hitting a wall. You wanna know why? The weapon collider actually hits the ground during the attack animation, causing it to sound like that. This game finds new and original ways to be bad. The sound design is all over the place. But while all of this can theoretically be fixed, there are also issues with the design presented by the resource systems the player has to keep track of, the stamina and combo bar, which are placed in the most idiotic positions possible on the UI. Did human beings design this? It is impossible to keep track of your stamina and combo bar simultaneously. Tests have been made about eye movement and optimal UI placement. Interface design is no longer in its infancy. Anyway, the idea is that if you time your swings correctly, you fill a bar that can be used to unleash a special attack, and each action, except walking, drains stamina. Dark Souls, this is not. The stamina bar is not punishing in as much as it is restrictive. You need to always save up for defensive purposes, since every attack bites into it, and having zero stamina means you can't block. Only late game, when I tried to stack as much stamina as possible, I started to feel a real sense of freedom with my attacks. The combat against weapon-wielding humanoids best shows how broken this system is. Getting hit or being thrown down interrupts stamina regeneration. So any 1v1 in which you put your opponent to the ground means you can automatically win no matter the power difference. You will always have stamina while the opponent is on the ground. Shields, which reduce stamina loss, can block without stamina and have a knockdown attack, make abusing this facile. It is such a blatant issue that I wouldn't even call it cheesing. In Elex, stuff just happens that lets you automatically win sometimes due to how broken the game is. The second resource, the combo meter, matches the broken stamina in its uselessness. When you do a strike, this little bar at the bottom of the screen will fill up based on the animation length. If you strike late, the combo stops, and you can't attack for a few moments. If you strike early, you get less combo meter. Once you have enough, you can unleash a special attack whose damage is dependent on how much of the meter is filled. Oh, and this special attack costs stamina and decays really fast at any difficulty, which will probably tell you how useless it is. At low levels, you don't have the stamina to use this attack without exposing yourself, and at high levels, you don't need it at all. After all, if you ignore it, you can just spam your attacks while paying attention only to your stamina bar, which is what I did. The punishment only comes if you swing too late. This feature was a complete waste of time and resources. It adds nothing to the game, and I seriously question the designers who didn't cut it. Now, all of this already disqualifies this game from being a good melee action system, but the cherry on top is the fact that Elex is the Dark Souls of hitboxes. Do I even need to say anything? What is there to say other than that they simply do not work or are not aligned with the animations representing them? My favorite moment was when I was trying to block different sorts of attacks and I couldn't get behind the logic of it all. I could block attacks from a troll but not a small critter. How is this possible? Then I realized that any, and I mean any sort of height difference destroys the hit detection. That running attack naturally comes above your blocking hitbox. That is why you get hit. So, after I lambasted the combat so hard, here's a question. Can it be fun or at least functional? Well, Elex is an action RPG, and the RPG can allow you to more or less skip the action. Piranha Bytes always treated range attacks and magic as cheating basically. It is clear the melee path is what the enemies were designed around. While Elex does add range capabilities to a lot of its mobs, projectile attacks retain their status of allowing you to play a pure stats-based role-playing game. Plus, the cheese is pretty absurd. Any AoE projectile in this game has a ridiculous hitbox, and when you get your hands on one of these, be it a flamethrower, berserker magic, cleric magic, plasma explosive shots, etc., you are pretty much set to stun lock everything and anything that even looks at you slightly funny, provided you don't hit yourself. The magic can be a real treat at times with how it breaks the game. My favorite was the phasing spell that summons a defensive hologram each time you roll. It makes any group fight a walk in the park. But these methods of playing the game are only available once you get past the HP bloat, and in this regard we need to talk about the difficulty. Gothic 1 and 2 are falsely attributed the label of super hardcore action role-playing games due to the initial hump most players experience. Piranha Bytes games have always been about finding the path of least resistance to progress. The world is filled with dangers and you figure out how to proceed, but once you are at the appropriate level you can pretty much push through by raw stats alone. What skill does is allow you to tackle harder content earlier, but everyone gets to the end eventually. I'd even call this a design strength. Elex, with its haphazard enemy placement and bad animations, already ruined this somewhat, but combined with any difficulty past normal, and the game becomes the definition of anti-fun. Do not even think about playing on hard or ultra like I did due to some sense of I don't know what. They turned the game into a soul-crushing war of attrition, which was never part of the originals. Only during the endgame with the best weapons did Elex start to feel borderline okay. The developers sort of tried to cover this issue with companions that are meant to carry you in the early game, but the AI is so slow to attack and react that it is aggravating to just stay and look for seconds on end before they finally decide to attack. Also, they can only handle the low to medium enemies. Anything higher than that and they turn into mincemeat. Look, I have several pages of complaints regarding the combat that could easily turn into an hour-long video. The point here is that this doesn't feel bad in as much as it feels unfinished. I think this video encapsulates the Elex combat experience. A soldier walks into a mine that he probably planted himself, it barely scratches him while it knocks me down, permitting him to get a free hit. I genuinely had to get up from the computer and take a break after this moment. This is an atrociously incomplete execution on a design document which I genuinely cannot say if it's good or bad. It is to the point I cannot tell you what is a bug or not. The Cyclops, for example, is the corrupted version of the rock-throwing trolls, but he doesn't throw rocks or have any range attack. Is this a bug? Who knows. So in that sense, I'll be able to tell if this is a good combat system once they release patches that refactor wall geometry code, refactor hit detection, readjust hitboxes, readjust activation timers on weapon colliders, rework stamina regenerations, adjust stamina consumption values, finish incomplete animations, add missing animations, adjust animation blending, adjust combo meter decay rate, refactor AI behavior, and completely rework both target locks. If they do that, then we'll probably be dealing with an actual finished €50 product. Now, knowing Piranha Bytes' MO of being stingy with their patches, the chances are we will see these changes in Elex 2. But hey, at least I gave a decent launcher list to any potential highly talented individual that wants to create a community patch in the same vein as Gothic 3. Now obviously, since this game is part RPG, we have to talk about the progress system, and they just couldn't let go of the garbage from the bad Risen games. This is where their influence is felt the most. For some reason, Piranha Bytes really wants to have non-combat attributes which serve no purpose other than to trick new players into spending their points badly. Spending your points early into something like cunning is useless. Piranha Bytes games have always been combat oriented first and foremost. The good games, Gothic 1, 2 and Risen 1, used the system where the player gained learning points each level that could be pumped into 3 attributes, tied to the melee, ranged and magic style of combat. You could also unlock abilities that generally cost 1 or 2 levels worth of learning points, but the main point was that you could always come up with a combat focused character. You couldn't be tricked into making a useless, charismatic character. On that note, Elex also continues to ruin trainers. The idea is that you have to go to a master to spend your learning points, but you have trainers for all general abilities in the first town you go to. Yes, the guys who reject technology can teach you about hacking and rocket launchers. If you're going to do this, why even bother? Just remove trainers and let the player spend points directly if you don't want to make the feature meaningful by having the player travel across the land to find different people to teach him. The old games did it that way, and the player's moveset was limited at the start to show their inexperience. Trainers would actually teach you how to grip a sword and harmonize your attacks, which which was reflected in new, better animations, replacing the older, clunkier ones. This is one of my favorite features ever, and the fact that Elex doesn't implement it upsets me greatly.
I want to improve my handling of one-handed weapons.
That's a good decision. Before you can improve your technique, you'll have to learn how to hold the weapon right. Beginners often tend to hold one-handed weapons with both hands. Now, don't even start getting into that habit. It'll do you no good. Hold the weapon with one hand, blade up, and keep swinging it. You have to learn to harmonize your weapon's swing with your own movements. That'll make you faster in the attack.
There are also huge issues with balance in regards to abilities. The mining trait doubles the amount of resources you get from a node, so you get 20 Elexit, the currency, instead of 40 when mining a node. Meanwhile, the animal trophy is without a doubt the strongest ability in the game, at max level turning every creature you kill into hundreds of Elexit. It showers you with money. What's funny is that again, the older games solved this issue. In Risen 1, mining increased the chance of also giving gems, which had other uses. In Elex, gems are used to power your weapons, but they are so rare and give such a small bonus that they have exactly zero impact. This feature could have been removed from the game and it wouldn't affect the experience in any way. Hacking and lockpicking are also spectacularly useless, and hacking has 6 associated abilities. You barely get any loot when opening chests or safes, so outside of quests, these things are not good at all. I have no idea why they decided to put loot out in the open or just straight up in unguarded places. I have been disappointed so many times by defeating a super monster and finding nothing, while being amazed to find good loot smack dab in the middle of the road, not being guarded by anything. Especially when you have so much crap lying around in the cities just waiting to be picked up with no consequences. Elix's entire ecology and loot distribution is severely underwhelming once you take a closer look. Another bad element that hanged around is the skill boosting items. In the very first minute of this game, you can find an amulet that gives you +1 to lockpicking, which begs the question, why would you ever get more than 2 levels of lockpicking since this amulet will boost you to the 3rd, which is the maximum? Risen 2 and 3 were even worse about this, with the player carrying entire wardrobes of stat boosting clothes around. It just feels like a sloppy way of adding something to the itemization, which is pretty bare bones to be honest. But if you can't find anything good to add, at least don't add bad things that break the system. It just feels ridiculous to have skill checks, which aren't all that impressive and mostly superficial, be cheated by putting on a fancy hat. Almost as ridiculous as the experience gains. This game is insane in this regard. Monsters barely give any experience, and when they do, it is completely nonsensical. Patrons are these giants with pitiful attack animations that make them a joke to beat, and they give 300 something experience, while the insect enemies like this spider are spam happy with their attacks, making them quite difficult to defeat while only giving 60 experience. And these differences pale in comparison to quests. Just to understand, I was level 29 after 43 hours, which is when I started the main quest proper. 5 hours later, I was level 45 at the end of the main quest. I was getting hit with experience like crazy. It throws the entire concept of a progress system out the window. Instead, it is a leaps and bounds system. All of this is probably why I won't ever replay Elex. There is a very clear way to play the game in the best way possible. Get a companion, try to ignore combat as much as possible, do only quests, especially the initiation ones, join a faction, try to do as many main quests as possible, get strong. Which is the polar opposite of what I did, trying to do as many quests as possible before joining a faction out of fear that continuing the main plot might make me lose storylines, challenging myself to beat monsters I had no business beating and receiving nothing in return. The lack of alternative gameplay is also something I started noticing around the 20-hour mark. Beyond the move, talk, kill main gameplay loop, there isn't that much else to do. The main quest offers no linear set pieces like the Orc Cemetery from Gothic 1 or the Orc Siege in Gothic 2. There is no telekinesis, swimming, shapeshifting, monkey pet, switching like today. Piranha Bytes made sure to add some alternative gameplay to spice things up in their games usually. The absence of such features is heavily missed the more Elex drags on. However, while some of this is unforgivable and shouldn't be glossed over by any means, Elex deserves a massive gold star for managing to achieve something that almost every other open world RPG fails at, and that thing is consistently meaningful currency. How many times in RPGs did you find yourself looking at your giant piles of cash and just selling your useless trash, for more useless currency out of habit than anything else, or just throwing it in some ridiculously priced money sink that reek of developer desperation when it comes to dealing with the titanic amount of cash a player can accrue. Even Piranha Bytes had this issue of currency becoming meaningless halfway through. Elex, on the other hand, is quite a well-balanced open-world economy from a gameplay perspective. While it obviously doesn't make sense from a world-building perspective that stealing everything that isn't nailed down barely affords you a sword, it more than makes up for actually taking in account the style of play that this game encourages. After all, your inventory is limitless, why wouldn't you just take everything you see from mugs to laser guns? And you'd better do that because that fancy endgame armor won't pay for itself. And even after you finish getting all the stuff you want, there is still a money sink that is tied with the world, namely Elex potions. You see, Elex potions can be used to boost your character, something you actually want if you don't want to hyper-specialize. It creates this nice divide between the human limit and what can be achieved using Elex, but the stuff turns you colder and colder. I do regret, however, that they didn't go all the way, sadly. I chugged industrial quantities of this stuff and only got the neutral ending. I feel the cold boost from using Elex should have been much more significant to make the world building element that much stronger. Even so, the fact that the economy works so well so many hours into the game is very much worthy of praise. That's what I have to say about the progress systems in this game. Now about something I truly despise, the interface. The consoleized horror from Risen 2 and 3 continues to be horrible. You can't just use some items like stims, no, you have to equip them to your hotbar first. But some items like armor need to be used from the inventory and can't be put on your hotbar. Consistency, what's that? Everything except weapons and armors is abstracted into a single tab, unlike the player's inventory, so you have to scroll through a million things before you get to what you want to sell. I hated every time I had to actually interact with a merchant because of this. The interface is also quite ugly. There are no three-dimensional representations of anything. Everything is represented by white, boring icons. It's sterile. Couldn't they have added a bit of color at least? And again, there is no character sheet for your stats. I still can't believe they didn't include this feature. I will finish this video by tackling some production issues. You've probably realized by this point in the video that Elex is filled to the brim with them, in almost every area. My favorite one is the absolutely blinding effect you get whenever you go into a building or exit one. I have no idea what the hell is wrong with the lighting here. With all that being said, I am actually gonna take this time to praise something. The game never crashed once, I only had a single quest I could not finish, and the loading times are crazy fast, which is impressive for a world this big. Thus, props to the engine. It is clear the issues stem from badly implemented content, but the low-level part of this product is quite solid. The music ain't, however. I know one of the studio veterans did it, but let us be honest, he is no Kai Rosenkrantz. I don't remember any piece except this piano bit here, which I'll probably also soon forget. This has been unequivocally the hardest script I've ever had to write since I started doing these video critiques. There were moments in this game, like pickpocketing a key from an innkeep that leads to a secret quest, which reminded me of my favorite Piranha Bytes games. But there are also moments like the fact that you cannot take the items from a knockdown opponent that reminded me of my most disliked Piranha Bytes games. Thus, Elex has caused the biggest divide between my personal opinion and critical view. The only way I can think of to proceed is to give you both of them. In a world where you have a ridiculously overpowered character as the protagonist of the spin-off game based on a famous franchise in which the main theme is that power corrupts, Elex brings me joy. My knowledge of the previous games of this style allowed me to evade some of the, and let's be honest here, jagged edges this product presents. Because underneath there were some seriously engaging moments of quest design and exploration. Were they 100% original? No, they were rehashes of a much better experience, but I'll take what I can get in this day and age. Even in such a broken form, because I am a fan, for better and for worse. To have a game at this price tag made by decades-old veterans be this broken is nothing short of insulting. Piranha Bytes tried to recreate the project scope of Gothic 3, even though they knew they didn't have the manpower to bring this product to fruition. The result is something only a fan could love, with some absolutely horrible first impressions that must be powered through to get to the meaty core that is reminiscent of the older and much superior games this company has produced. Elex can only be described as a bad game built in the image of a very good one. Those are my thoughts on this game, conflicted as they are. If I would be forced to make some sort of ranking, I would say that the 3 compact landmass games, Gothic 1 and 2 plus Risen 1, are still the good. And Gothic 3 plus Risen 1 and 2 are still the bad. I'd fit Elex somewhere in the middle. It has clearly made strides in the right direction, but Piranha Bytes is far from where it needs to be. But the real question is, why did Elex need to be so big? Why try to redeem the failure of Gothic 3 with largely the same amount of people? Score-wise, the old games hold sway over both critical and consumer opinion, and commercially, Risen 2 is probably their most successful title due to the marketing budget. I genuinely hope that Elex 2 takes place in a smaller world. There is almost nothing to gain and everything to lose by going way above your means with something that isn't the studio's forte, as the previous games have shown. In the end, I can only hope what will follow shall be a full return to form so I can create a video praising Piranha Bytes from start to finish. Nothing would make me happier.